Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The former IBF champion Charles Martin wants Anthony Joshua, who he believes is now gun-shy, and that will prove itself out the next time he faces a big puncher, like himself. So what I'll do in this video, I'll get to his quotes and some comments along the way, and then let's examine the chances of Charles Martin getting another fight with Anthony Joshua. Obviously starched in a couple of rounds in 2016. That was how Joshua got his first belt. But can he actually get another shot at Joshua? And actually he is closer than some may think. But obviously in the scheme of things, with the mandatories already piled up, you got to ask the question, will it happen anytime soon? But also, what has Charles Martin done so far since that devastating laydown sally against Anthony Joshua back in 2016? We'll talk about that too. So buckle in. Let's go. Starting with the comments. So talking to boxingscene.com, Martin says, "That's all I'm thinking about. When I'm in there training, I'm training for Anthony Joshua. I want to knock Anthony Joshua out. That's how it goes when so many people write you off and the world writes you off, and then everybody is criticizing you about it. It just fuels you more to want to get the get back, climb all the way back up the ladder and face that man that started all that shit for you." Of Andy Ruiz Jr. and the rematch, the performance by Joshua, Martin stated he was very scared to engage. He didn't engage at all. He ran, he boxed, he moved, and that wasn't even his style. He lost all that weight and stuff like that because he knew, but I don't take nothing from him. He's a good dude, a stand-up guy, but he's scared to get punched. He's scared to be in the trenches. I know with somebody that can punch, he won't be the same. He's gonna be pretty wary. That's the reason why I'm here. That was not me, man. It was crazy. So I have to get that back. I don't feel right. It doesn't sit right with me. I'm still here and I'm going for Joshua. I don't care about no other fight. I'm going for Joshua. At the end of the day, that's who I want to fight. That's who I want to knock out. Andy got to him before me, but he seems pretty gun-shy. I can't wait to punch him in his head. Those were Charles Martin's statements. So what we'll do first is we'll unpack sort of the different sort of paragraphs one by one, and then on to the other things that I mentioned I would get to. So Martin thinking about Joshua, and that's all he's focused on. Well, he's actually sort of going the right route to try and get that rematch, albeit it might be some considerable time off. And why I mentioned that is, we'll just look at the other mandatories. Joshua, as a unified champion, already got a couple of ordered mandatories, including the current IBF. So IBF mandatory Kubrat Pulev will then be followed potentially by WBO mandatory Alexander Usyk. Maybe there will be an undisputed fight at some point. Who knows? We've got this whole pandemic at the moment that's going to stretch things out. And then you consider the WBA mandatory. That will be due at some point as well. So in the order of things in terms of mandatories, if Joshua keeps winning, Martin has still got a ways to go, but there's no lock he would get that fight either, because at the moment he is the number 2 rated contender in the IBF. He won an eliminator with Gerald Washington. It was a really good knockout by Charles Martin, good performance. So he is number 2. He's talked about a final eliminator, so he's still got some hurdles to go. And then even if he does secure the mandatory position eventually, it's probably going to be quite a wait to get to Anthony Joshua if he continues to hold the title. So that is a fight that, you know, who knows if it could actually, by the time it eventually occurs, because you start talking about these things, if Joshua, the champion, keeps winning on that basis, fights 2 or 3 times a year, might be 2 years before Charles Martin, even if we had boxing now, before he would get a shot back at Joshua. So that mountain, as he keeps talking about it, wanting to get back, he's still got, you know, some distance to climb. One, to secure a mandatory shot, because let's be real, he's not going to get a voluntary anytime soon. He's not the sort of prime sort of heavyweight elite that Joshua would be looking to face in a voluntary shot. But getting back to some of his other statements in that first tranche of comments, where he talks about people have written him off, that everybody is criticizing him. I'm not sure what he sort of expected from fans when effectively he laid down in 2 rounds, took a couple of punches, decided not to get back up, when clearly when you watch that second count from the second knockdown, He could have got up. He sort of chanced it right at the end to get up, but the ref waved it off. That was a situation where it was his own fault, and it looked like he didn't want to be in there. There's a reason people are criticizing him, because for all the smack, including
"I walk this earth like a god,"
he didn't back it up. He laid down, and ultimately he handed his belt to Anthony Joshua. People believe he sold the belt to Joshua. But obviously it's ignited some sort of fire within him. He wants to sort of right the wrong as he sees it. And he's got some measure of respect back from fans since then through a couple of performances. But I'll come to that soon, because the other statement. So he talks about Joshua being scared to engage, didn't engage at all. He ran, etc. Well, Joshua did what Joshua needed to do to get his title back. And, Martin respects that. But he's looking at this as an opportunity for him. He feels that Joshua didn't want to sort of get hit by Andy Ruiz Jr. And there were one or two hairy moments in the rematch where you sort of thought, with Andy Ruiz Jr. landing a couple of shots, oh, how could this sort of play out here? But Joshua back to the outside, sticking and moving, and ultimately got a comfortable points decision. But he says Joshua was scared to get punched, scared to be in the trenches. And when you consider that first fight with Charles Martin, he wasn't scared to be in the trenches then. But some may argue, well, he's been changed by the Ruiz performance. But I would sort of argue styles make fights, because you look at a guy like Andy Ruiz Jr., different dimensions to Charles Martin, significantly shorter. Fights, a bit different to Charles Martin, but also the blaring hand speed. That was something that gave Anthony Joshua, in particular in the first fight, trouble. He couldn't see some of the punches coming, and obviously he ended up getting clipped by one in an exchange. But Charles Martin, he doesn't have that same sort of hand speed. Martin is a guy who really will stand mostly in front of you and box, and he'll look to sort of, land straight left and a few other punches. But he's not a guy that, is necessarily looking for the same sort of opportunities like Ruiz, who's looking to use his fast hands to counterpunch. And that's what he did to really hurt Joshua in that first fight. Obviously, the counterpunching opportunities were few and far between in the rematch through the style that Joshua implemented. But I do think that the style matchup is not necessarily a great one for Charles Martin. I think Joshua would be more willing to effectively did what he did the first time that he fought Charles Martin, knowing that he's probably going to catch him, because Martin, not particularly quick on his feet, not particularly quick with his hands either. Sure, he can hit hard, but he's got to catch up with you. We didn't see that in the first fight with Joshua, but it's not to say that he can't do it, because obviously we did see him, catch someone like a Gerald Washington, and obviously that, ended the night. So if he catches Joshua, it could be all over. But I think many people would pick Joshua in a rematch to demolish Charles Martin, that the weight of his punches might be too much for Martin, as it was the first time around. Dropped him a couple of times. So I don't necessarily believe that he's going to be gun-shy with a guy like Charles Martin, who he will take confidence from the first time that he fought him. He's already solved that riddle and knocked him out, dropped him a couple of times, and Charles Martin didn't want it anymore. I think what's being sort of understated at this time, where Joshua has, received some criticism for his performance in the rematch, is that Joshua is still one of the bigger punchers in the division. And against guys that are a similar size to him, he's generally performed well. Some of the style matchups where he's maybe looked a little less confident or competent is against smaller guys. Didn't look great against the awkward Carlos Takam. Didn't look great necessarily against Andy Ruiz Jr. Obviously, that third round sort of changed the course of that fight. But a guy like Charles Martin, I think, he obviously has to have confidence in his ability to try turn things around. But I haven't seen anything that he's done since the loss to necessarily say that he could beat an Anthony Joshua. If he lands a punch Joshua doesn't see coming, well, that could end the night. It's heavyweight boxing after all. But Joshua at this point would still go in a roaring favourite, and I don't believe he would be gun-shy against that style of Charles Martin. He would largely, I think, look to do what he did in the first fight. He would probably be fighting from the mid-range, looking for the right hand, uppercut, left hook, those sort of combinations that Joshua likes to land. And when you consider what Martin has done, what confidence can we have that he could beat Joshua? What's he done since losing to Joshua? Because, as I said, he might have, all things being equal, Joshua continues to hold the IBF title, etc. Martin, say, eventually gets the mandatory position. Could be a couple of years before they fight. He probably would have to have a number of fights just to, stay busy and keep the ring rust at bay. He would need to be active to some degree. So there's some risk in that as well. But since he lost to Joshua, not a lot on the resume. He's only had a total of 6 fights, and 4 of those were effectively against either journeyman or an unproven prospect in Greg Corbin. The only 2 guys that were approaching a world level were Adam Kovnatski and Gerald Washington. And he lost that Kovnatski fight. Although that was the performance where, he actually earned some respect back, because he had been a running joke with boxing fans for some considerable time. But that Kovnatski fight, he actually battled back, showed heart. And as Kovnatski tired, and it was only a 10-round fight. If it had been a 12-round fight, Martin may have won. But the first 5 or 6 rounds, Kovnatski just put it on him, but then gassed badly. And Martin started to really come into his own. And it was one of those sort of situations. I believe Kovnatski effectively won the first 6 rounds and Martin the last 4. So if it had have been, maybe another couple of rounds, it might have been a different story. He might have been able to stop the gassing Kovnatski. And the other fight where he secured the number 2 rating in the IBF rankings was where he beat Gerald Washington. Very good-looking knockout, 6 rounds. That was a fight he largely looked good in. And obviously brutal sort of stoppage at the end, stopping Gerald Washington. I think they were number 9 and 11 respectively. And all of a sudden, Charles Martin in the queue to potentially become the next IBF mandatory. Maybe only 1 fight away, could be a final eliminator, which Martin has talked about. And who that would be with, it's unclear at this point. But someone like a Michael Hunter in the IBF rankings at the moment is in a prime position if they do have a final eliminator. But Martin, he has sort of clawed back some credit and respect from fans from recent performances. The Kovnatski and Washington one, even though Kovnatski was a loss, he needed to show something to fans to get them believing actually there's something in this guy, that he can still be a player of some sort in the heavyweight division. And that Washington knockout obviously showed that he's still got pop. He can still foot it at a top 20 sort of level. But now he probably needs, someone in a final eliminator to really get fans believing that he is the real deal. But whether fans want to see that fight again is another question, given the outcome of the first. But even then, as I mentioned, it could be, 2 years minimum away for Charles Martin if he continues down the IBF route, because he won't be getting a voluntary. And a lot of things would have to fall into place, as I mentioned earlier, that Joshua would have to keep winning and Martin would have to keep winning and also stay active too. So this call out that he wants to fight Joshua, it's only about Joshua. It might be a case that it never comes to pass, but I'm sure he's going to try, his best to make sure it happens. But what do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.